look, we've had two energy crises in the last decade. This countries have subscribed to globalism, and I don't know if I mentioned it in the last video or not, but I know I had the conversation saying, look at what happened just between China and the United States alone. Now that the world embraced global trade, Pat Buchanan um, has a great. He really changed my mind on a lot of the ideas of globalism and global trade and free markets in a global trade world. And just look at the United States' industrial base swept out to China, and then if you look at China, they're they've had not a complete brain drain, but in a lot of ways they have because they've exported their students to American universities in droves, and their country can't produce any type of real creativity, whereas the United States has all this creativity, but they can't really produce it. And so, just in that alone, you can see in a free market, you see a lot of times price draw down and production increase. It's not always the case, and I'm being very broad, and it's tough for me because the nuances are important. But I'm just trying to show you the broad. This is how it works. Because if you're going to make paper clips, and you can make paper clips domestically for $10, but you can quite literally like make them for like $2 in China, including shipping costs, there would be no reason for you as a business owner not to outsource that, especially if the quality is the same. Or if the quality, maybe the quality drops, but it drops by 10%, but you're making a 500% increase in profit. Again, still, so like these are no brainer situations. I'm telling you how it is, not how it should be. These are no brainer situations for people. Same thing for China. China, I don't know their infrastructure there in the same way that I know the one-way trade between us and them. But China outsourced a lot of their education to the United States. And I'm sure if you did a fraction of digging, you would probably realize that I haven't done it, but I would assume the Chinese educational system at higher education uh, just can't compete with the United States. Or it might have even been some type of trade deal. That's also possible. Because what you're seeing is the Chinese slowly are being indoctrinated into the United States' culture. And again, this is a form of statecraft. You need to be able to understand these things that we need Chinese students here because then they go back to China, but they're pro America. And that's one of the ways that the Americans are able to usurp powers and usurp public opinion in other countries. So you need to be aware of these things and the strategies that are involved. It takes out a lot of the emotion. But yeah, Condoleezza Rice also said in terms of Iran, and now again this is a little bit dated, but she said we would rather have no deal than a bad deal. And as we all know, the talks were called off this past Friday, or excuse me, this past Friday. Today's Friday, so yesterday if you're watching this tomorrow. Um, so now we'll actually start to get into some of the nitty gritty of Iran, and then we'll be going into China and then Russia's energy sector. This is going to be a fairly quick show today, but commercial shipping through Hormuz appears to be increasingly subject to Iranian conditions. So if you look, I believe it's on OPEC's website. They have a few different charts and graphs you can look at, and you can see that a lot of shipping is actually passing closer to Iran. And, there's reports coming out now, contrary to popular belief, there has been trade through the strait. And it looks like what's happening is these ships are just paying the toll. There seems to be intermediaries sharing voyage information, paying the additional fees, and the ships are not taking their normal shipping routes. They're taking routes that are closer to Iranian waters. Um, it's just, again, it's interesting to see there's still some trade going on. Now, the important thing is onto the overarching thesis, which is this is a huge play for the United States to corner the oil market in a lot of ways. China has actually very recently expressed distancing from Iran. And the original agreement between China and Iran was China was basically buying um, under the table oil from Iran. They weren't paying the same prices as everybody else. What's happened with this is it seems that following whatever agreement we come to, the Iranians are going to buy, or excuse me, the Chinese are going to buy Iranian oil at above board prices, which is going to hurt the Chinese. And China, specifically, I don't know the guy's name, but well, I have it here, but it's just his last name. Um, when asked specifically, they were talking with one of the Iranian leaders. They said China supports Iran's efforts to improve relations with regional countries and exploring joint development of regional security architecture. Navigation through the Strait of Hormuz needs to be properly addressed. Now, this was in direct response to Iran looking to have China become a closer ally. And if you see in the wording there, they're not saying that they're going to be specifically working with just Iran, and they left it broad and open, even though Iran was pushing for a formal alliance. So what this is basically is like a very diplomatic way of like a guy wants to date a girl and he says, will you go out with me? And she says, I think we should just be friends. She's not saying, get out of my face, you weirdo, and ostracizing them, but she is being diplomatic and saying, look, we can be friends. I'll still talk to you. You still talk to me. We'll say hi to each other, but we're not going to be in a committed relationship. That's just not going to happen. Same thing here, basically. China's saying, no, we need to keep our options open. And with China buying that above board Iranian oil, it's going to increase their costs overall. So that margin that they had prior is going to be decreased. You can imagine, and this is really sinking the screws into China because the Russian energy has also increased, and I believe now it's back at a discount, but it had increased. And again, like I was saying, this was like a big deal because the United States could essentially be leveraging that and saying, look, you and India want to do deals with China. This is what it's like to deal with China. We can put our thumb on the scale. We can shut off the majority of your energy, and the energy that you do have, we will increase the cost. But a little bit of quick, things to cover. It seems that Beijing or China has said to Moscow specifically, there is no way we're going to be. So some of the pipeline negotiations aren't even going well between the two countries now. China wants to have significantly low price on the oil that's being pushed through the pipelines. And Moscow is literally demanding like pretty much over double the price that China is willing to meet them at. And then there's a halt in some imports. So, it's really interesting. We're starting to see these global players. And I will say, too, I was giving a little bit of context about Putin, but China was another world power that came to Putin's aid and said, yeah, why is it the United States is the only world superpower? Why can't we be on that stage with them? So, and that kind of began the trifecta of the degradation of the idea of a rules-based order, on the face of it. And now you have China and Russia supporting, or it seems they're still pretty committed. And I would say that it's going to take a lot to separate them, but there is a wedge in their relationship, and it's growing, and it to a significant degree, it's growing. Um, but yeah, so what is interesting to note, and I didn't know this, through my research, I found that actually we all think of China as being super disgusting and gross, with like um, pollution and smog and stuff like that. They're actually leading the world in clean technology, and clean energy, and in manufacturing of solar panels, wind turbines, and EV batteries. So, and a lot of that does stem from China. I believe they still are, but they were a huge importer of waste and plastic refinement back in the day. Now they produce plastic. Um, so yeah, that's a little bit about China.